So we'll get started. Thank you so much to everyone who is coming down to our new location for gigs, at least for hopefully just for this meeting. But hopefully we'll be back down at Maine in August. So just some business stuff before we get started. We have no meeting in July, and then we'll resume a meeting in August through the end of the year. So we have bookmarks, none here at Eastern, but we're all online. All the events are online, so check those out. They should all be in either in person or also offered online as well. So if you do miss them, you should be able to access them after the fact too. So if those guys go on vacations or anything like that, you can still catch up with us. Just some housekeeping for the folks online. If you want to turn off all of your sound and your cameras, that'd be much appreciated. Just because those little boxes get in the way of seeing the screen. And then if you do have any technical issues, just contact me in the chat. So my name is Catherine Whalen. So just contact me directly, and then I can try and resolve any issues that we have. But it is my sincere pleasure to invite our speaker today. She's going to be talking about her genealogical journey and publishing journey and the whirlwind that was and is still currently. Jeri Surad will be coming up and talking about her family history. So please, let's welcome her.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. It's been such a pleasure for me to finally be here. I'm just so excited. I think she said if I go like that or not. Oh, okay. I think we got that. Okay. All right. There we go. Yeah. So I, like you, am a genealogist. And I started researching my tree when nobody else knew anything about our family. Coming from a background of a career father who had a career in the military, we moved every 2.5 years. So I didn't even get any kind of spin on who my family members were, where they lived. We didn't have relatives over for the holidays. That might be a clue. So unfortunately, in 1968, my father passed away. I was at the age of 12. And he was an only child. So not only were we never stationed in Northfield or Minnesota at all, I didn't even have a chance to ask him who his family were other than his grandmother that I knew. So I had a little bit of a work cut out for me. However, I didn't know I would be doing this. So as fate would have it, I got into high school when I was 18, and I was given an assignment to do a 4-generation spreadsheet on my family. And I thought that was quite unfair. So my mother helped me, and we looked in our family Bible, and that's how I got started. And the world has just opened up to me, and it's just been an amazing ride. So I've entitled this Some Inspiration to Discover and Write Your Family's History. 4 months, your months, and years of research have documented your family's history and can assist others research for their family's history. These books preserve our discoveries and your family's every existence. Here are 5 of my favorite family history books documenting Clara's life and lives of our ancestors. You see John Olin up there to the top left. Top right is the Barber genealogy that was most helpful, the Fuller genealogy, volume 4. And yes, that meant I had to read all the other 1 through 3 volumes to find it. Images of America Middleton to the far left, Roxana's children in the teal color. And then the 4 places that I did a lot of research, my favorite places. Minnesota Historical Society is one of the best for military and history of the state. I would highly recommend going to your state historical society. Northfield Public Library is where I lived for 10 days in 1997, researching Clara's life. Middleton library is called the Flint Public Library. And when I was there in Massachusetts 2 years ago, I made a trade for a mouse pad for a book. So I'm reminded of this every day when I'm at my computer. But they helped me the greatest. I was telling some of the people here earlier that when I got to Middleton, a couple of months ahead of time, I had called and said, "Excuse me, I'm looking for Fullers. Would you be able to help me?" And the lady laughed. She says, "Which ones?" So I was in Fullerville, if you were. Well, quite a bit of information was available. Anderson was my father's mother's family name, and I saw my first 4-generation chart going back to 1789 in Hurdal, Norway, when I was 12 in 1966. Royer is my mother's father's family name. My mother's cousin, Harry Royer, a World War II veteran, devoted decades to researching his family line by 1982, and he traced his lineage back to 1689 in Boll, Germany. Woodward is my mother's family name. My grandmother's handwritten genealogy was completed up to 1924. The Woodward family tree goes back to Lee, Massachusetts in 1720. My father's family did not have a genealogical record of our Fuller line. There was a family Bible that had 2 generations listed in it only. Then fate stepped into my life. At 18, I was given an assignment to trace my Fuller family tree 4 generations. So the way I started out was I started just like you. My girlfriends were babysitting and buying vinyl records of the Stones and the Beatles. I was babysitting and I was buying vital records, birth, marriage, and death certificates. So I knew I was in a little different category there. What I discovered over time of about 20 years, I had other people asking me to help them. Ancestry was not online. There was no internet. There was no large databases to search. So I came up with Get Into Your Family Tree CD-ROM with instructions of how to research and every place you could write to obtain a vital record. I even put in how much it would cost for that county because it was available. A lot of hours typing. I thought it would be a little humorous if I could show a man actually getting a ladder, climbing into his tree, as if that would help. So I thought that would be kind of fun. Then I spent 10 days in Northfield Library to discover Clara's life, and it unfolded before my eyes at the library, researching documents, marriage, birth records, marriage announcements, when they went to war, when they bought and sold different properties. So that was a gold mine for me. Doing research firsthand is my love. And so what you'll find in this presentation is I have been to Minnesota for 10 days. I have been to Canton, upstate New York. I have been to Middleton, Massachusetts over the last 40 years, getting the information that I may or may not find on the internet. I then have a collection here. This is at my desk at home, vital records, obituaries, family history, back to 1638, collection of letters. These collection of letters is where it all began for me. My great aunt, who has now passed, she died in 79, told me of a child named Clara, born from my great-grandfather's first wife. We didn't know there was a first wife because there were no history, there were no stories, and there were no photos. So that became my mission. Then I was interviewed by Northfield News, and they did a nice spread on me because I was coming back to town after 24 years after I had my book published. I made it a point to meet up with the people that I originally had worked with 25 years earlier, take them to lunch day, take them to dinner, let's meet at a park. And I am just so grateful I did. I've only lost one person since that time that is no longer with us for me to share my story of getting their help in my book getting published. I was showing one of the ladies here earlier in part 5 of my book. This is kind of the table of contents of my genealogies. And I have 11 generations of Fuller history, and I've done them by generations. And I was lucky enough that the last 6 generations, I have photos of them. So just to plug my new book, yes, I've written a second book, and it's only because I realized that people like yourselves do genealogy research, and it's really tough to cross over and start writing that. And it's not that difficult. Like anything else, writing is uncomfortable at first until you have written enough to it becomes comfortable. So in my guide to writing, it'll be an ebook. So it's like $2 on the internet. And I have several different ways to help someone get started. This very first example here is one of 3 writings. My mother was a wartime bride. I tested this to, number one, see how my writing skills were, and I tested the subject. I put this sample of my writing on the internet on Facebook. In 2 weeks, I got 850 hits. And so many conversations I should still be writing at this point. But I discovered it wasn't my writing. It's the subject matter. We are losing our World War II veterans more and more every day till there won't be any more. And the commonality of threads through families, I thought was really quite heartwarming. And it makes me feel good about what I've done. We're preserving the history. And my greatest encouragement to you is to join a writing group, even if it's 4 or 5 people. One of the suggestions I have down here at the bottom, write your beginning paragraph for your introduction. Print 6 more for each one at the table. Have them do theirs. And now you go home with 7 copies in your hand to look at. Now you're not comparing research, although you're going to, but what you're going to be looking at is style. Oh, they said that in a way that was easier to read, or this was kind of funny and now I'm engaged, I want to know more. The whole idea of writing better is with practice is to have your reader want to turn the page. Are they interested enough to find out more? So that's coming up soon. I want to just segue off to that. Finding Clara, I began to write my family story from the beginning. I started with what I knew. I started with me. My mother did not know that my great-grandfather had been previously married because there was no family history, stories, or photos of Clara or her mother, Martha. Over the years of researching my family tree, I became more aware of America's history alongside my Fuller family history. So that's military, that might be regional, that might be all kinds of things that tie us together, not only as a family, but as a country. I would go on to solve 7 family history mysteries back to 1638 in Middleton, Essex County, Massachusetts. And one thing I found, the more history I found, I knew there was more to find. In the early years, in 1972, the internet had not yet been invented. No powerful search engines that could help me locate large genealogical databases. I learned of a child named Clara from one of my Fuller ancestors. All I knew about Clara was that her father was my great-grandfather, and that her mother's name was Martha, and that Martha was born in Vermont. At least that was a start. Clara May Fuller is my great-grand aunt, born from my great-grandfather, Charles Emery Fuller, and his wife, Martha. Clara's birth certificate shows that she was born January 29th, 1875 in Northfield, Minnesota. I had just solved my first family mystery. Charles and Martha's marriage certificate, to the right here, shows that they were married on Northfield, May 18th, 1872. Martha's full name is Martha W. Way on the certificate. However, when I did some further research, the W stands for Walbridge. I don't know if you have any Walbridges in your family, but I will show you a book that could maybe help you. Charles and Martha's certificate showed that they were married in Northfield. Her full name was Martha W. Way. Both of their fathers' names were also provided as witnesses. John S. Way, so now I know Martha's father, and Emery L. Fuller, Charles's father. The heart of genealogy research. Knowing where to locate information proving your family's history is vital to your success and will make you a good genealogist. Success, the next mystery I had to solve was where in Vermont Martha was born. Remember, I did not have the internet to search any of my family's databases since they did not exist. In 1984, I enlisted the help of the Mormon Church's Family History Center. I hope you've used that resource. If not, go check them out. They had an international genealogical index. This database that identified numerous towns and cities across America with vital family information. These records were kept on microfiche. Can you even remember using a microfiche? Yeah. It is here that I found Martha was born May 18th, 1850 in a town called Peacham. My daughter is in the audience, so I'll try to embarrass her. Her and her husband knew this information when they went to Vermont on a fall foliage trip and was able to take a picture of the Peacham church for me. It was wonderful. I noticed that her birthday was the same month and day as her wedding. Martha celebrated her 22nd birthday on the same day she was marrying my great-grandfather. The second resource confirmed that John S. Way was in fact Martha's father. Next, I found a book called Roxana's Children by Lynn Bonfield and Mary C. Morrison in 1996, just a year before I went on my trip. It contained the history of 3 generations of Clara's family. So here, out of the middle of nowhere, I'm finding a book written on her family that nobody in our family even knew about to begin with. It gets better. Clara's grandparents are John and Sarah Way. They're born in Peacham. Sarah did not have her husband, John, present when Martha was born, her first child. Really? John returned home 3 months later in August of 1850 after he was panning for gold in the gold rush in California. His pockets were full of rocks. He mined $2,700 worth of gold nuggets. And he told his wife about a place called Northfield in west part of the country in Minnesota. The Walbridge and Way families. This is the book that I found. I opened the front cover and somebody's done their homework. There is a genealogy just laid out here for me. Roxana Brown had married a man named Daniel Walbridge. And they had 6 children. Then her husband passed away, met a man named Lyman. He had 3 children. Then they ended up having 3 more children. A total of 11 children were in this household. They were busy. Sarah Walbridge, Clara's grandmother, married John S. Way in 1849. Martha was born in 1850. We just heard that story, but now we have all of this other family history. I discovered early on that using the general proof standard, the GPS, not on your phone, is crucial to credibility. It keeps you from barking up the wrong tree. Roxana's Children describes a history of the 19th century in Peacham, Vermont. It filled in several genealogical gaps in Clara's mother's family, the Walbridge family, and her parents, John and Sarah Way. It also told of life in New England in the 19th century. Martha had worked in the textile cottage industry at that time from the age of 14 to adulthood, bringing additional income into the home. And come to find out, it was this very occupation that would eventually end her life early. Because it was a cottage industry, there wasn't good ventilation. They were working 10 to 12 hours a day at 14. And there was all the big rush because you now have these machines that can make cloth, and the north side of our country, the northeast side of our country there was really into manufacturing. So she was jumped in it just like everybody else did, and it ended up shortening her life. Clara's grandparents were John and Sarah Way. Her great-grandparents were Roxana Brown, born in 1802, and Daniel Walbridge, born in 1796. I would spend another year collaborating on this new data. Martha passed away when Clara was 2.5 in 1877. With every discovery, I was inspired to continue researching. So in 1997, I decided I'm going to go to Northfield. Nobody's been to Northfield that I'm aware of, and I'm going to do my own research on Clara. I started in St. Paul, and I flew in to get to the Minnesota Historical Society because I had a copy of Charles's obituary. I flew into Minneapolis on 1997 to learn more about my father's family history and about Charles's Civil War history. I discovered Charles's information in the Civil War Veteran Index for Minnesota. Have you done that here? Have you gone to the state historical societies finding your Civil War soldiers' history? You can do that because every state was required by law. It was a legislative law that they had to not only keep a record of the rosters of their enlisted men, but they also had to have a narrative of where they served. So at the end of the day, you could actually say, did the South win? Did the North win? That was imperative. Minnesota was required to raise a militia for the Civil War effort, the same as other states in the Union. The regiment's first orders were to get to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and to secure the heavy guns at Lookout Mountain. Now, if you look at this roster, Charles Fuller's name is on the very bottom. It shows that he was 18 years old when he enlisted. He mustered in February 15th, 1865, and mustered out September 27th, 1865. What I thought was interesting was the remarks off to the side. You saw when people were promoted, you saw when they were discharged, you saw when they were transferred, and then you found when they died. When they died, they listed the battlefield. In this case, for Horace Brown, it was on the battlefield of Nashville, June 24th, 1865. I thought that was very interesting and very respectful. Clara's mother, Martha Way Fuller. Martha Way Fuller is buried near other Way family members in the Northfield Cemetery. Martha was 27 when she passed. This tender letter is from a collection of letters that Lynn, the author of Roxana's Children, she was able to share these letters with me because she knew of the Fuller connection I had made with her. And it is written to Martha's mother, Sarah Way. Isaac Watts is Sarah's stepbrother, and he is still living in Peacham in 1877. He goes on to say, "Dear sister, I received some letters from Northfield several weeks ago, giving the sad news of Martha's death. Your letter to Ella a few days before led us to expect such news, and yet it came suddenly, as such news always does." He goes on to talk about their relationship as young people together living in Peacham before they moved west. I was so privileged to have this relationship with Lynn Bonfield. I spent 25 years conversing with her, sending Christmas cards back and forth, and in turn, she could share these letters with me. These letters belong to a collection for Roxana's Children. I do not have the rights to put them into my book, so I'm sharing them with you in this presentation. Clara Fuller was only 2 in 1877 when her mother, Martha, died. Charles was a traveling salesman covering several states with Minnesota at its center. John Way was a statesman, and he had this family home built on St. Olaf Avenue in 1883. Clara lived here for 11 years. I had to find out if Charles had a home in Northfield. Emery L. Fuller, Charles's father, bought this property as the very first owner in 1856, and he sold it in 1861. Charles E. Fuller, his son, bought it back in 1898, and it is located on 1400 Forest Avenue for himself and his second family. Charles and Alice lived there for more than 25 years until 1923, when Charles passed away at the age of 77. In 1910, Clara was 33 years old when Charles had this photo taken below of his second wife and children in Northfield. The back row to the far left is Donald Van Dyke, then it's Margaret Eileen. Charles Emerson on the far right is my grandfather. Front row is Jessie Ray. Jessie Ray has a special story in this book of Finding Clara, because her and her husband, owned and operated the Grand Theater for 30 years during the early 1900s. And you'll find the match to that on the next slide. Standing next to Jessie Ray is Ralph, and he's the little boy there next to Charles. And he was born standing next to Charles and his wife, Alice. There we go. Ralph Fuller was the youngest of Charles's children. He was born in this house in 1903 when his father was 60. Ralph passed away in 2002 at the age of 99 in Northfield, just a few blocks from his father's home. Clara had visited the big white house there as a young wife and mother many times. What I was learning from all my research was the more family history I found, the more I knew there has to be more to find. Getting back to the documents that we all love, and that is the Clara W. Fuller's 1880 U.S. federal census for Northfield, Rice County, Minnesota. Clara May Fuller was 2.5 years old when her mom died in 1877. This was a great place to add the documentation I had collected regarding Clara's early childhood. To the right, you see all the information laid out there for you. Thank you, Ancestry. 3 years later, I discovered Clara at age 5 was living with her grandparents, John and Sarah Way, in Northfield, Minnesota, along with her aunt, Clara E. Way, at the age of 22. With this verification, I needed to verify that Clara's parents were both in Vermont. And that did it right there on the certificate. It shows that father's birthplace was Vermont, mother's birthplace was Vermont. Clara and Sarah and John Way was in fact their granddaughter, right down there on the bottom. And you know, when you print from Ancestry, they'll highlight the information you're looking for that person. So in this case, I didn't highlight that, it was already done for me. This census record encouraged me to collect more historical records to trace Clara's life. The mock trial in 1997. Unknown to me, the day I arrived in Northfield on July 18th, 1997, was the day before the city's reenactment of the trial of Frank and Jesse James and younger brothers, to be held at the Grand Theater. The mock trial of Frank and Jesse James. These two desperados are coming from Missouri in the attempt to clear their names. They will stand to face the charges of cold-blooded murder of Joseph Lee Haywood, who was the cashier, and Nicholas Gustafson, who was a bystander. And let's not forget the attempted bank robbery of the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota, September 7th, 1876. You are invited to go back into time and to experience this unscripted trial of the century. I was tickled to death, but I didn't even know this was happening, and I walked right into it. Who knew that my family might have a connection to this famously attempted bank robbery? My family's history unfolded before my eyes just by showing up in Northfield. What was interesting to me was that my aunt, Jeri Fuller, and her husband, Everett Dilley, once owned and operated the Grand for over 30 years in the 1900s. Then I get over to the Northfield Historical Society and I find more history. I found that what my Fuller connection was to the attempted bank robbery. It was on the front page of the Rice County Journal, dated September 14th, 1876. My great-grandfather, Emery L. Fuller, was listed as one of the witnesses sworn in 1876 of this tragic event. Isn't that amazing? So I figured if a obituary worked once, maybe it would work twice for me. And I found the obituary of Charles's brother, John. John's obituary stated that he served as a volunteer on the Hook and Ladder #1 for 27 years for Northfield. I made a phone call to the Northfield's fire department in the spring of '97, and I was granted permission to come and research their historical archives. No one had ever done that before. I was so privileged to do that. I came with a stack of books over to Mitch after about 3 hours, and I asked him if he could print these things that had little stickers in them. And he shrugged his shoulders and simply pointed to the copier and just let me know when I need to add more paper. I thought he was most generous with that. It came in real handy because my book describes many details of the department's history back to 1872, including its 125th anniversary of the fire department in 1997. And I did get a shout out because I had taken the time to put all of their photos in chronological order. And it really helped the newspaper put their story together. The front poster here shows the poster from about 1922. And I made bigger pictures. In the center here is a picture of John Fuller, whose obituary I found, and he served from 1895 to 1922. I also found out that his brother Charles, Clara's father, served from 1872 to 1877. Now, what happened in 1877? His wife died, and that's when he moved to Minneapolis to find work there steady. He was still a traveling salesman, but that's when that change happened. His son, John's son, next to him, Charles Fuller, served from 1922 to 1928. And again, those dates are significant. They could not have two direct family members working, right, in the same business. The gentleman to the left is George LaPointe. He is John's father-in-law. Now that was permitted, so he was able to work there. And as it turned out, my husband at the time in 2005, Jeri Surad, retired as fire chief on the fire department for 35 years of service at Point Mugu Naval Base in California, where we lived. So everything comes full circle. The Underground Railroad and Family History. Chauncey C. Olin, one of the books in the very beginning, I think I showed you the John Olin history book. He relates 25 years of unexpected information about the Underground Railroad from 1842 to 1859 in Waukesha, Wisconsin. His direct involvement helped over 30 slaves find freedom on the Underground Railroad by aiding them to Canada. The first Underground Railroad in Wisconsin and Waukesha had Milwaukee as its northern terminal. The first conductor was Deacon Samuel Brown. The first passenger over this line is the picture here of the young lady, Carolyn Quarles, as an escaped slave from St. Louis in 1842, and tells the story of the terrible man, Titball. There's always a terrible man. The other two slaves pictured here, the one in the middle is Joshua Glover and Lewis Washington, also found their freedom on the Underground Railroad. Chauncey's biography tells how Joshua Glover's case went all the way up to the Supreme Court and to President Buchanan for a ruling. Had nothing to do with his status as a slave. It had to do with the injustice of his slave, his master. He had served his time. He was a free man, and his master decided he wanted him back. But because there was a law called the Anti-Slave Act, he could come back and claim that man once again. What they did is they beat him. He was able to convince the sheriff to put him into jail. So now they're in cahoots. He's in jail for 3 days, having been beaten, no food, no shower, nothing. The townspeople made up a lot of Quakers, and my family member here, Chauncey C. Olin, they broke through the jail. They rescued him. They fed him. They clothed him. They got him to Canada within 24 hours. They could not touch him. The case went against the man who had beaten him and put him into jail. He ended up spending over 2 years in jail himself and became penniless and pretty much a broken man and ruined in the society after those actions. So these things were happening before the Civil War. So things weren't just stagnant up until that time. It was an exceptional case prior to the Civil War, and this sketch also includes a few slave jubilee songs, which when you read John Olin's book, it's also online and it's public domain, so you can copy things and not have to get it copyrighted, but the songs are beautiful and it's poetry. Okay. The other information in Chauncey's biographical sketch was unexpected. Clara Fuller's additional education in 1891. Chauncey describes his niece's additional academic history. She's always been a good scholar and paid strict attention to her schoolwork. While in high school in Northfield, she had additional instruction from a competent teacher of elocution. The State Educational Association for Minnesota had their annual meeting on December 28, 1891 at St. Paul and offered prizes for the best oracle effort. Miss Clara W. Fuller earned 89 points, the highest given that day. Clara was 16 when she won that first place prize. Her recital was of the simple love story in rhyme called Archie Dean. The audience applauded the effort and asked for an encore. Chauncey goes on to say that he and his sister Althea Olin Fuller, Charles's grandmother, were very grateful and thought Clara had a bright future. Clara was the, I'm ahead of myself. I get so excited. I'm getting to the next slide. At 18, she was not only attractive, but also had successfully mastered poise and eloquence in an academic atmosphere. Then, just before my trip in 1997, my research efforts discovered whom she married. Okay. All right. Emory L. Fuller's family, Rice County Historical Society and Carleton's Gold Library Archives. Emory L. Fuller's family and several of Olin family members participated in the Great Western Migration. These families traveled together from Canton, New York to Waukesha, Wisconsin in 1845, then on to Northfield, Minnesota in 1856. Charles and his father were engaged in farming. The Rice County Historical Society and Museum documented when the Fullers, the Olins, and the Way families entered Northfield. I copied the Rice County plat maps and the histories of these early settlers of Northfield in Rice County. Their copy of the Illustrated Atlas of Minnesota from 1874 has an abundance of early Rice County history, and it has nationwide statistics. A new acquaintance of mine, Betty Jo Kendall, was inspired to share Carleton College's history and campus with me. I met her at the mock trial a couple of days earlier that week. She said, let's meet up at the college. I'd like to show you around. Carleton's Gold Library kept the academic history of Charles Fuller. Senior archivist Eric Hilleman located Charles Fuller's college records from 1867. Charles and Martha were taking two of the same classes, prep and English. 5 years later, they were married in 1872. Then I discovered Clara May Fuller had also attended Carleton College in 1894. She is our first female ancestor that attended college. This was 26 years after both of her parents had attended there. This college history about Clara and her family encouraged me to write her biography. Next, Eric brought me William H. Holland's college record and a copy of his class photo. He graduated in 1895 with a classical degree. Clara, like her father, met and married a student from Carleton College. Clara Fuller and William Hollins were wedded June 11, 1896. Then Eric brought me the college records of Clara's children, Harold and Margaret Hollins, who graduated from Carleton in the 1920s. This college history about Clara and her family encouraged me to write her biography that would include this unexpected academic history. Got to be careful what you ask for. Clara W. Hollins' marriage certificate and announcement. So the benefit I had of researching at a public library, I can find the documents, pay for them, have them come to my house in a week. But until I go to the library, I'm not finding their wedding announcement. The spacious residence of Mr. and Mrs. John S. Way Sr. was the scene of a very pretty wedding. Thursday afternoon, Clara Fuller, daughter of C.E. Fuller of Minneapolis and W.H. Hollins of Millbank, South Dakota, were the happy participants. The house was beautifully decorated with ferns and roses. When the proper time arrived, the bride and groom entered the parlor, preceded by three pretty little girls, flower girls, Gertrude Greaves, Margaret Fuller, and Jessie Ray Fuller. The following guests were present from Minneapolis, Mr. and Mrs. C.E. Fuller and children. So by this time, the eldest was born, Jessie Ray, who owns the Grand Theater, the brother Donald Van Dyke, and my great-grandfather. Those were the children. Mr. and Mrs. Hollins were leaving on the evening train for Montevideo, where they will remain for a week before going to Big Stone Lake to spend the summer. I've never been to Big Stone Lake. Have you guys been there? Okay, I'm sure it had great fishing, right? With every new addition to my family's history, my efforts were enforced and generated in me that the more family history I found, the more I knew there was more to find. So again, as a genealogist, I found the actual document of her marriage record, but then I also went online to make sure that there was a certificate noted to make sure that the dates weren't hinky or something was falling between the cracks. So that's the other thing I talk about in my book are some genealogical research methods. Just vital to your research. In April, I rephotographed Clara's headstone. The only photo I have of Clara Fuller Hollins is included in the John Olin family record written by her uncle, Chauncey C. Olin, Clara's uncle when she was about 19. Clara Fuller Hollins was born in 1875 and passed away May 13, 1943 in Minneapolis at the age of 68. The only photo I have of William Hollins is from his 1895 senior class photo at Carleton's College and the Gold Library Archives. William Harold Hollins was born in 1870 in Hastings, England, and he died November 27, 1952 in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. He was 82. And then looking at the death certificate for Clara, over to the right, she was under a doctor's care for almost 8 years. And that's, again, is all lung related. So I know she didn't work in any, a fabric or industry like that, but there was something definitely there with the genes as well as the environment that her mother passed away so young. The informant on Clara's death certificate was her daughter, Margaret Hollins, and it captured her married name, Margaret Hollins Parker. So that enabled me to do further research on Clara's descendants. So if you guys think you're done researching, you're not done researching until you talk to your relatives. At this time, I didn't know any relatives because I had never met them. My daughter, sitting over there in her little chair, said to me, "Oh, Mom, I'm so excited. You're going to Minnesota for 10 days. Are you going to meet any living relatives?" I have to be honest with you, I didn't even think about it. I didn't even have that idea enter my mind. I got on the phone and I asked 911, "Can you help me?" Not 911, 411. That's a different kind of help, right? 411 to see if they could help me with John, Charles, or an Emery Fuller that was in this area. And sure enough, they found a Charles Fuller, and he is the gentleman there in the baseball cap, and his wife is Beverly to the left of him, and his aunt, Caroline Fuller Fleisch, is to the right. Now, Caroline was born in 1920, and she had a physical ailment and was brought down from the Twin Cities to Owatonna, where they were living. And I was so excited to meet her. Well, apparently she was very excited to meet me as well, because she had photos she wanted to share. Aunt Caroline was born in 1920 and shared these photographs with me while in Owatonna. The first picture is of Emma LaPointe that was taken in 1883. She is John Olin Fuller's wife, and I just love the bustle. The second picture is the picture of the three Fuller kids, as I call them. Charles, who is sitting down in a suit, Mary to the right of him, and John is standing. Now, the age difference between John and Charles is 20 years. This photo was also taken in 1883. But who would have thought that I would have to travel from California to Minnesota in July of 1997 to identify this next photo taken in 1883? Caroline had handed me the last photo and asked if I knew who this couple was, because no one in their family knew who they were. Yes, I did know who they were, and now my arms were covered in goosebumps. They were Clara's grandparents, Emery L. Fuller and Althea A. Olin. And how do I know this? Because in John Olin's family history book, there is a picture of Althea Olin right next to Clara Fuller. And I recognized her from that picture immediately. The give and take of these family photos coupled with family stories were terrific discoveries for both of us. I was not the only one increasing Fuller family history. I'm sure you have found this to be true in your research, right? When you're able to put those connections together, it's a great aha moment. This is generation 6, and I bring this up for a reason. If you'll notice here, there's these gold stars. There are 3 children here that lived past childhood, and you see Emery there, married to Althea. They had a daughter first, Mary. She was born in 1843 and died in 1845 in Waukesha, Wisconsin. So it's not a coincidence that that big journey that they made on that Western migration didn't take its toll on the infant. They lost their first daughter. Charles was then born in Waukesha in 1846, followed by Mary, who was sitting to his left. She was born in 1850. There is a daughter then born by the name of Clara in 1853. I had obtained the census record from 1860 and found that she was 7 years old. And then I go to the next census record and she's not there. Okay, it's 17. You could be early married. You could be working in another household. I wasn't ready to give up, but I just didn't know the answer. It is not until I came to Northfield and I go to the cemetery and I'm looking at these beautiful headstones and taking photos that I began taking grass and dirt away from a broken headstone laying on the ground. My first clue is it had a lamb on it. The second clues had Clara May Fuller, daughter of Emery L. and Althea, who died at the age of 10 in Northfield. Mystery solved, but that was my second documentation of that family member. And I actually had to write a letter to the Mormon church to let them know, excuse me, this person belongs to this family and let's not drop that. And they were most grateful. It took about 3 months to get the letter back, but I felt pretty good then putting those family members together. And then John Olin is born. He's the youngest. And if you'll notice his middle name is Olin. So each one of those children that had children, John, Charles, and Mary, each named a daughter, Clara, after their sister who died in 1866, 63. Now, the interesting thing for me is Mary was 13 years old when her sister died at 10. That had to have been very impactful on you as a person. So I thought that was very, very sweet. Family history books. We're back to that. Researching the U.S. Census records for Canton, New York in 1800 to 1840, I found two heads of household named John Fuller and John Fuller Jr. I soon discovered that they were father and son. John Fuller Jr., however, was older. He is our American Revolutionary soldier. But because those years doesn't have the spouse's name, doesn't include names of children, and now you're categorizing them by sex and age, it's pretty useless information in my book. The only benefit I got is that John and John were living next door. I made the connection that they were in fact related. Searching the collection of tombstones in Canton, I ran across a curious inscription. Maria Fuller, wife of Peleg Olin, another Olin, daughter of John and Violet Fuller, they're the parents, who died in 1843 at age 30 and 6 months. If you do the math, this indicated that Violet had married John before 1813 in order to have a daughter named Maria. And from Maria's age and birth and death date. Emery and his sister Maria had both married into the same Olin family. So now I had two siblings that were together and I knew who their parents were. They're just giving me breadcrumbs here. The father, John Fuller, was one of the John Fullers on the 1840 census. It showed that this John Fuller was in his 50s, because they can't get real specific there. He was born in 1788 in Middleton, Massachusetts. I did not know when or where Violet was born or what her surname was. Then I discovered a last will and testament of John Fuller. It was not of his father, but his brother, his older brother, John, who died May 2nd, 1876 in Canton. And this will is an outstanding genealogical find. It listed the names of all 8 siblings, including his sisters' married names. Thank you very much. And the city and state where each of the siblings were living in 1876. Well, I felt like I just hit the lottery because now I can research each family line and do more inclusive information. Miranda married a gentleman with the last name of Ewers. Betsy married a gentleman with the last name of Palmer. Lovina McKee was, all 3 of them were living in Canton, New York. Maria Robinson is the daughter of Maria, whose sister had died, remember, at the age of 30. So he included her in his will. Maria Robinson of Vineland, New Jersey. Emery L., Josiah S., and Jane L. Merrill were all living in Northfield in 1876. So you start counting 9 children. Okay. The last child's sibling's name was Z.I.M., and I couldn't make out the rest of the handwriting. It's handwritten. It wasn't typed, so I couldn't read what those last. If his name was Z.A.C.H., I bet you that's going to be Zachariah, right? Or Zachary. But Z.I.M., I'd never heard a name like that before. And he could not be located in 1876 for the reading of the will. I don't know if you guys know about the thing called the cha-cha, the genealogy cha-cha. You go 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Well, and for me, I want to go back with Violet because I don't know her surname. So I want to go back a generation. In order to do that, I'm going to go up here, back to our thing. See Clara there, died in 1863. Then you got John Olin. He's carrying that family name from his mother's maiden name. He marries a lady named Emma Ellen LaPointe, and they have all those children. Oops, one of those sons has a surname of Barber, in the middle of his name. I had to request birth certificates, each and every one of those children, to make sure I wasn't missing out on a surname. And sure enough, there's Barber. I took a chance, I rolled the dice, I plugged in Violet Barber for this particular time period. And now we're not looking at huge populations, we're looking at smaller populations, and I found her in Connecticut. I used that surname, and I found by doing this cha-cha, and it proved out to be Violet's surname. Violet Barber was born January 13th, 1796 in Barkhamsted, Connecticut. Her father's name was Zimri, Zimri. The Barber collection, the Barber genealogy, traces their family back to 1614 in Rhode Island. You see a picture of the book there. I could now make out Violet's and John's youngest child's name. It was Zimri. They had named him after Violet's father. I thought that was so cool. Hopefully you have those connections in your family. Here's a copy of the will, what I was looking at to try to discern these names. And again, it listed all 8 siblings, the sisters' married names, and where they were all living. And John, by the way, went by the name of Jack because there were 3 Johns. Emery's brother, John, his father's name was John, and then that other mysterious John Jr. on that census record. 2 more family trees to trace. By 2010, I was able to verify and complete my family's history on both of the John Olin family and the Thomas Barber families. Caleb Olin was born in 1753 in Rhode Island and followed his family back to John Olin in 1678. Zimri Barber, Violet's father, was born 1764 in Simsbury, Connecticut, and traced his family back to Thomas Barber in 1612 to Windsor. These genealogies are included in my book, Finding Clara, Part 5. My brother really was insistent on me. You can't just do the Fuller line, you have to include these other families that intersect. And I'm so glad he did, because it makes more sense to people. And you never know, maybe your ancestors are connected in there too. Clara's colonial ancestors, 1756, 57 to 1638. It goes really quick now because I'm not going to give you all that detail. You got to read my book to find out the details. John Fuller II was born in August of 1757 in Middleton, Massachusetts. This John is our American Revolutionary soldier. He died in Canton on January 8, 1840. I obtained a copy of his pension application showing that he had served on the Massachusetts and Connecticut lines from January 1st, 1776 to July of 1777. You'll have to discover why John Fuller II is not a junior in the pages of Finding Clara. The first genealogical resource for these individual colonial records was from the Vital Records Online for Middleton. So now it's making sense that the lady I talked to at the library was asking me which Fuller. These 4 colonial Fuller generations began with John Fuller II, matching up with my information. The second genealogical research on my colonial Fuller family generations came from the Fuller Genealogy, Volume 4, which we had already discussed here. Yes, I had to read volumes 1 through 3 to find 4. It recorded that Thomas Fuller Sr. sailed into Cambridge Harbor in 1638 from Norfolk, England, settling in Woburn, which is now called Charleston. Thomas Fuller Jr. is the first of our family who was born in Massachusetts in 1644 under the English government called the Massachusetts Compact. The third resource in this book is the book written by Arthur Buckminster Fuller, the great grandchild of Thomas Fuller. He's not the gentleman that built the geodesic building. He is a reverend who actually fought in this Civil War under being a reverend in that capacity. He had already put in his time. He decided he'd go out to the field one more time. He might be needed, and he caught a bullet and died. But before he did that, he wrote these lines. What he discovered about our ancestor, Thomas Fuller, who came in 1638, he was inspired to write a poem about his decision to stay in the colonies instead of returning home to England. In 1638, I set my foot on this New England shore. My thoughts were then to stay 1 year and here remain no more. But by the preaching of God's word, by famous shepherd he, and what a grateful state I was, I began to see. There's like 7 other paragraphs that are more religious in nature, but he clearly made the distinction that religion in the new world is a lot better than religion in the old world, and he decided to stay. And just so you know, this guy had some chops. He was a blacksmith. He had money in his pocket. By the time he lived in Woburn and had his children, there were people in the area that said, hey, you're really needed up in the northern part of the country because we need a blacksmith. And he said, oh, okay, that sounds great. And he bought 300 acres. He had worked for General Dennison in the Phillips War and become acquainted with him and bought the 300 acres from the general. Thomas Fuller was inspired to remain in New England. The question was asked if our ancestors came from England on the Mayflower. I said no. Our English ancestors sailed into Cambridge Harbor in 1638 and said, the 7th family history mystery solved. Then I traveled to Massachusetts in 2021. Here I located information about the town of Middleton on the Flint Public Library's website. The Middleton's history map, we discovered my earliest ancestor's home. It was the home of Lieutenant Thomas Fuller, built in 1684. This home is listed on the National Registries of Historic Places. I took that picture in August of 2021. It is still standing. The next book I obtained was The Images of America, Middleton, which is put together by Shirley Paul Reynard and the Middleton's Historical Society. In this book, it showed 4 other Fuller family homes still standing. They were also credited for being one of the families that supported education. There were 4 schools built, one for the north, the south, the east, and the west of town, and 2 of those schools are still standing. One of the Fuller schools is still standing. I couldn't believe it. When I began to write Clara Fuller's biography, I had no idea I would spend 40 years discovering 11 generations of our family's history. I solved 7 family history mysteries and discovered where our oldest progenitor, Thomas Fuller, lived in Middleton, Massachusetts, in the United States. I go on to share a lot more patriotic information in the book. I talk about John Fuller II, who was our American Revolutionary soldiers. His uncle fought in the same war, but he was captured by the British. He was not shot. He was put on a ship, sent to prison in England. After our Constitution was put in place, the people with the legislature required that those people be returned to our homes. And he did live out the rest of his life in Pottstown, St. Lawrence County, New York. The moment you find you are ready to write your family's history is the day you begin a new journey. What message will you leave to inspire others to discover their family's history? Here you will be recording your legacy and voicing your observations of the generations gone before you. I hope my journey has inspired you to begin yours and to write your family's history for the next generation's edification. Thank you. I don't know if you would like to. I was asked by Catherine if I would like to share one other bit of information here, and I would love to if you guys have 2 more minutes. So recently, it's a pretty exciting process to get your book published and all the headaches and heartaches and joys and tears that come with it. But I thought I would do that with you in a little slideshow here. I started my journey. This is coming now to the end of 2 months of being on a book tour, and I started in Northfield. I figured that was appropriate to go back to where I had started to gather the information. And so the letters written up there on the top is actually taken from that newspaper article that was written about me. Author solves family history mystery by delving deep into Northfield's history. I'd gotten to the Historical Society. I went to a couple of libraries. I went to the Minnesota Genealogical Society. And as fate would have it, I went to their place when they were actually having a full-blown conference. And the lady asked if I was there to do one of the speeches. And I told her, no, I wasn't, but I'd be happy to if they needed someone to fill in for them. The ladies and the gentleman down at the bottom there with the hummingbird, I went into breakfast into her establishment, and she said, I think I recognize your picture from the paper. And so we started a conversation, and she had a book that she had published. So we swapped books. And they had a great food there. It was wonderful. And then I went out to dinner that night. And so here I'm at dinner, and I'm having somebody say just about the same thing, that I think I saw your name in the paper. Would you mind signing a book?
Screen, because no one at home can see it.
Oh,
Oh, that's okay. It's just so exciting. Thank you. There you go. There.
okay. So those are those first pictures that you heard about, but now you can see them. And then these are the second pictures here with under the reunion. It's a restaurant I went to, and I'm ending up signing books. The three ladies here with me and the two elder gals there were my original contacts. Kathy Ness is the lady in the white shirt. She was the librarian that I had been conversing with for 25 years. And Marie Gary was my hostess at the bed and breakfast. That started all of it, because when she came to pick me up, she was in an 1870s outfit. And I was afraid this is going to be a psycho chapter in my life. Maybe I should get back on the plane. But she was a reenactor to the mock trial, and was the one who told me that we're going to have a cast party over at Kathy Ness's house. Would I like to attend? So I actually had to put a clean t-shirt on, because I'd been doing this for hours all day. And I got to meet everybody, even the antique guns during the battle, in the streets for the bank robbery. And the funny thing about the bank robbery, the cashier couldn't open the door for him because the door was already open. It was already unlocked. It just wasn't shut. So he was not lying when he said, I can't open it for you. You got a gun on me. I'm not moving. They did actually kill him, but the money was saved. They never got into the safe. Really crazy. And then I went to the St. Paul Library. Oh my gosh, just walking through those doors, and the marble and the history there is amazing. And then I got down to Carleton College, where the gentleman did the research on Charles and the family for the history at the university. And he was just a delight to talk to, because he was like, can you just give me names of your family members? And I'm like going, okay, I can remember 12, and handed them to him. And he was able to find that college history. I thought it was amazing. And then the other gentleman here in Northfield Library, he was a professor at Carleton College, and he came to attend. I met the grand, you can see the grand picture there. I went back to the theater that my ancestor, Jessie Ray, and her husband, Everett Dilly, had owned. So I got to walk around the inside of the theater once again. And then I went to St. Olaf College, because you can't do Carleton without doing St. Olaf. And Steele County down in Owatonna, I got to do a presentation for. See if we can move. Is there a way to move that top part out at all?
That's one. And then you can exit out.
Okay, there we go. This is when I was in Chicago, and I was just there. Gosh, it's a month ago already. It seems like it was yesterday. One of my objectives was to try to get my book into as many libraries as I could. Many libraries don't have funds to purchase books, so you make donations. And when I got to the Chicago Public Library, I was totally blown away. The architecture and the artwork is all mosaic in this building, and it is phenomenal. So just to walk in the doors, I felt privileged just to be there. And so I learned a little trick. If I take my book out on the streets of Chicago and say, excuse me, could you take a book of the that I just published, would you mind? And they take a picture of you, and then of course they're going to ask you about the book. And so I found people that were interested in genealogy or history in general, and I ended up selling 4 or 5 books that day. I got some exercise. I was on Michigan Avenue, and then I walked over to the Cloud, and I was over at different places, and I got to meet some lovely people. The picture of me and the young girl there, we look like we're sisters, and we're not. So her mother is actually from Salem, Massachusetts, and I was telling her about Middleton, and she was tickled to death and was going to promise me she was going to take a picture of herself in front of my family's home and send it to me. The other picture is when I was in Omro, Wisconsin. I was able to go all the way up to Minneapolis and then cross over to Wisconsin. Took a few days off before I came down to another presentation in Illinois. So New York City, I got home yesterday from New York City, and it was only because my publishers had a 2-day event that I could go to. And I wasn't going to miss out on that opportunity. So from the plane, I was actually on the right side of the plane to take a picture of New York City from the plane. And my first stop was the New York City Public Library. And I was not disappointed. You've got lions on both sides of you, and you've been there. It's magnificent. And this is just some of the interior shots. I just felt, you feel humbled and you feel privileged at the same time, about this small. And they, at this time, we're doing the Charles Darwin collection. His collection of letters is off the chart. So I felt like every time I went someplace, it was one more thing that was just so special. And this library is free. They don't charge you to go in. And it was like, I would have been charging you people, somebody's got to clean up the stuff. So the very first day that I'm in New York City, I do the library and I do the meet and greet with the publishers, but I bought tickets to Hamilton. And I got to see it off Broadway at the Richard Rodgers Theater. It was pretty spectacular. So I don't have any pictures of people actually performing because it's prohibited, but I can sure show you the stage. And it was pretty amazing. I have it on my phone. I'm not going to be embarrassed to say that. I have the entire sound thing on my phone. And then this is, oh, do you? Thank you. And I sing in the car, and you gotta do it. In New York City, I was at the event. This is a full day event, and I was able to get their bag. My book is way up in the corner, right under the U that's in there in green. And it was pretty exciting to see my book amongst other publishers. And then this is a gal I had my picture taken with. And that kind of wrapped up my tour. This is my last presentation here in Iowa. And then I go home on the 9th. So it's also my birthday. Thank you. Thank you. You guys are so patient to share this with me. I just, nobody else got this treatment. Thank you.
Folks in person. So one of our online attendees actually made a similar journey to Owatonna.
Yes.
From California.
Yes.
Serbian Webster, who moved there from a remote farm a few years after the Civil War, and her husband was killed. And through an unexpected chain of events, they found new discoveries. So similar fun genealogical.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So the library can ask questions on you.
Well, thank you.
Ask her, if you're at a stopping point where you can't find birth certificate or anything, is that the next thing that you would go directly to that state or city?
I would.
Okay.
What I have found is you can ask 100 questions and you might get 5 answers. If you don't ask the questions, you're never going to get. So even if you ask, you may come across someone who does know. And so that has been part of my success is I can stand in a room or talk to a few people and it's like, hey, this lady had this question. And invariably I've got someone coming forward. And
If people like to go to, where would you find the birth certificate from, like in the 1800s? Do they even?
yeah, I would start at your vital records. I would start at the state vital records. So a funny thing, when you read the book, I had trouble finding Clara's birth certificate. I wrote to Northfield, right, Rice County, for her birth record. I'm sorry, you have to go to Minnesota and St. Paul because it's prior to 1900. So they do it by dates. So it's like those records are going to be held by a different entity. So I found that out. I just had to wait 2 weeks to find out.
Have time where his dad, I have no dad and mom for grade 2nd grade. And at 13, he was in,
Yeah.
he was working.
What states are you working in? Tennessee. I would start at the State Historical Society, and you can also do the Gen Web, that project that they do. It's massive. It's across the country. Everybody does the Gen Web projects. They're actually individuals that go around and do cemeteries. They do obsolete or obscure places of records, and they make complete records and then they upload them. So you may get lucky that way, but by putting inquiries, you can put an inquiry. Can you please look this up for me? You don't know how many people are seeing that. And they're going to pass it around to see if they can help you.
Inkling that I have him even being around when he was 13. He was like living with this other family doing chores, so I don't know what happened to his.
Right.
And there's no documents to see.
Yeah, it's tricky. I would start there though, because you may get lucky. I've been lucky and I didn't even know I was lucky until it was like, oh my gosh, like that will was off the chart. Yeah. And the interesting thing too about the colonial records, I ended up with 5 resources documenting the same colonial information, when in the 1800s, I am struggling for 2. So I think it was really quite the pastime. If you had the time and the inclination, maybe a couple of dollars to get that family history out. And most of those books now, the John Olin book, the Fuller genealogy books, the Barber book, those are all public domain, which means, and that's what I did with my book. I actually took the pictures right out of the book and they're in my book. So you as genealogists can see what I'm looking at. One of the issues in my book is it talks about John Fuller II, right, our American Revolutionary soldier, and he had 3 children. The first one lived and had children, like 9 of them. The second one is John, who married Violet Barber. The third one died young. The wife, I have her death record, is still calling herself Polly Fuller. They either separated or divorced because he's now in New York and he's got another wife named Olive, and I could not find her last name. But the thing in the Fuller genealogies, they said, oh yes, and then he remarried this lady, Adele somebody, and had 2 more children. She's 27 and he's 72. I think they got that wrong. I'm just guessing, but I don't think that's going to happen. But you got to realize they don't have computers. They don't have these things. They're doing the best they can. And you have a lot of Johns, you got a lot of Marys, and they're mixing the information up. So I'm not going to fault them by that, but I do at least address it in the book.